Good morning, boys and girls. I hope everyone is staying healthy and safe at home. I know that this is really tough, but Mrs. Maloney and I really miss you. For the past few weeks, we've been reading stories on Monday, and we've been reading a new type of book, and it's called a hybrid text, which means we're taking two genres and we're morphing them together. So, what we've been reading is nonfiction and fiction. We're going to continue that today with Yucky Worms by Vivian French and Jessica Alberg. On the cover, I noticed a little boy and a cat and lots of worms with little speech bubbles underneath them. This one says, "How rude. I'm very nice. We're not yucky." Let's start reading. Yucky Worms. One day when I was in Grandma's garden, Grandma dug up a slimy, slithery, wiggly worm. "Yuck," I said. "Throw it away." "Throw it away?" Grandma looked horrified. "Would you throw away one of your friends?" "You can't be friends with a worm," I said. "You can't even tell which end is which." "Yes, you can. Watch." Grandma put the worm down. It gave a kind of squirmy, wriggly, and disappeared really fast. Pointy end first. As the rounded end vanished, Grandma said, "There goes its tail." I bent down to look, and I could see it had left behind a little tunnel. "Where did it go?" I asked. "Home," Grandma said. "It's an earthworm. It lives underground." On this page, we can start to notice the different size fonts and the different size text. Over here we have large font, and over here we have small font. Let me read the small text for you. "In most backyards, there will be about 15 worms in every square yard of soil. Worms have 5 pairs of hearts. An esophagus is where the food is broken down. They have skin that is covered in mucus to make it easier to slither around." Why do you think they have the small text on this page as well? We have the story here in our large text. Why do you think they have small text as well? Let's keep that in mind. "But what does it eat? Dirt?" I wanted to know. "It eats tiny, tiny stones and bits of dirt," Grandma told me. "But worms eat other things too, like rotting leaves and flowers and fruit and dead insects. They especially like eating at night when it's cool." The stones and dirt help to grind everything up in the worm's stomach, and then the worm poops it back out. And then again, we have the small text saying, moldy. Dirt is good for you." "Quick, yuck, can't eat this." Worms come above ground to find things to eat too. Nice and rotten, just how I like it. It's kind of funny that they're making them seem like they're talking like people. Does anyone remember what that is called? When we give a non-human object humanistic characteristics. It's called personification. Grandma pointed at the flower bed. "Look, can you see?" I bent down and I saw what had looked like a weird, long, curly worm made of dirt. "That's worm poop," Grandma said. "It's called a cast. You know when you recycle things? Well, worms do it too. There's still a lot of goodness left in the things a worm eats. And when the goodness comes out again as poop, it helps plant to grow big and strong. And as the worms move around, under and on top of the soil, the poop gets spread around the garden." Right here is the cast. "That's why worms are my friends." Grandma gave me a thumbs up. And it's not just their poop that's good for plants. The tunnels they dig loosen the soil so roots can stretch out and air and rainwater can get in. Look at the little tunnels throughout this page. It looks like there are words in it. Let's see. Worms' poop is so fine and crumbly it never blocks their tunnels. In a square yard of soil, there will be about 4 yards of earthworms tunnels underneath it. Some people call worms underground farmers. Worms can wriggle backwards and forwards. Oops, forgot something. Better reverse it. But it's dangerous being a worm, Grandma said. I stared at her. Dangerous? I asked. She smiled at me. Lots and lots of animals think worms make the most delicious dinner. Birds love them, and so do moles, badgers, frogs, hedgehogs, and foxes. Even some slugs eat worms, and human beings accidentally slice through them with spades and spikes with forks. It's a tough life. Cutting them in half doesn't hurt them, I said. They just turn into 2 worms and keep on growing. Grandma shook her head. Poor worms. Lots of people think that, but it's not true. She put her fork down. Time for a snack. What do we see on the shopping list? Worms, worms, worms. Very funny. You can see the birds and all the different animals and how people hurt them too. A worm's tail can regrow if it's cut off, but cutting a worm in half will kill it. Grandma had tea and I had orange juice. Can I dig up a worm? I asked. If it rains, Grandma said, the worms will come up on their own. I want a cookie. What if it doesn't like rain? Grandma winked at me. We'll use the watering can and pretend. I finished my cookie as fast as I could. Can we trick the worms now? The smaller print on this page says, worms breathe through their skin. They don't mind the soil around them being wet, but if their tunnels are flooded, they come up to the surface and move around more easily. Grandma filled the watering can, and I watered the ground. Then I stood back. I didn't want worms chewing my shoes. They only put their heads out, Grandma promised, and it'll be a while before they do. Over here it says, when it's very hot, the soil gets too dry to slither through. A worm will wriggle down to where the soil is still damp, curl up, and wait for it to rain. When it's very cold, a worm can wriggle down even deeper, below the frost level, and curl up with other worms for warmth. Grandma was right. I had time to eat 2 more cookies before she said, "Look!" "Wow," I said. I could just see the tip of a worm above the ground. "Now watch this." Grandma stamped her foot, and the worm disappeared. "Did it see you?" I asked. Grandma shook her head. "Worms don't have eyes." "They feel vibrations, though, and a thump like that means a hungry bird is landing. Danger!" Grandma dug her fork in the ground. Up came lots of dirt and wriggly worms. She picked one up and washed it in the watering can. "Mustn't drop it," she said. "They can't swim." Grandma put the clean worm on some paper and held it near my ear. I could hear a tiny rustling noise. "What's that?" "They're covered in little bristles," Grandma said. "The bristles and muscles help them move." Look at all the worms that she picked up and just that one piece of of dirt. The bottom says, a worm has rigid muscles all along its body. To move, it pushes its front end backwards and uses its bristles to hold the end in place while the back catches up. The bristles on the back keep the worm from sliding backwards, while the front end tunnels forward again into the earth. You can see over here the tiny little bristles they have on their muscles and how the front part pulls up and then the back catches up. Very cool. I've got muscles too. I bent my arm so Grandma could see. If you've got so many muscles, she said, maybe you'd like to help me plant my sunflower seedlings. Okay, I agreed, and then I thought of something. When I go to school on Monday, I'm going to say that I have lots of new friends. Good idea, Grandma said. But, I said, I might not actually say they're worms. On our last page here, it tells us how to be a wormologist. Let's see what they have to say. Look for worm casts in your garden or in the park, leaves sticking up out of the ground, worms on the surface after it rains. Experiment by watering a dry patch of grass or dirt and watching to see if worms come up. Tapping on the ground to see if you can make a worm believe it's raining. Carefully digging up a fork full of dirt and counting how many worms you find. A worm in the hand. When you pick up a worm, remember to be respectful. A worm is a living creature. Check out how it feels. Is it smooth? Is it slimy? Can you feel the bristles? Watch how it moves. It is a youngster or an adult. Adults have clitellum, a yellow ring around their body. Put the worm back in newly dug soil and watch how it wriggles away. Always wash your hands after touching the worm. What a good book. So we had both elements of nonfiction and fiction because we learned facts about worms, but we also learned about a story about worms, a more personal story that might not necessarily be true or actually happened. So we are going to read another story in a couple of days that I will send to you guys. And maybe if you're bored, you can go out and play with some worms. But make sure you're washing your hands and taking care of yourself. And we will hear from you soon. All right, thank you guys.